Hi, this is more of an addendum to the last video than a real standalone explanation, but I thought it was important to clarify the difference between what I would call targeted tariffs and broad-based industrial policy. So when a country opts for targeted tariffs, that means that they put restrictions or taxes on a particular firm or a particular country uh, in terms of importing from that country goods or services into their own, right? So this would be, for instance, putting punitive tariffs on steel exports from China to the United States, right? Or electric vehicle exports from China to the European Union or specific countries. Um, Another way of looking at industrial policy is to say, instead of targeted tariffs, we're going to enact broad supports, subsidies, or protections for a domestic industry or sector, right? So rather than punishing a specific foreign firm or a specific country and blocking or taxing imports from that firm or country, instead we're going to support a domestic industry either for domestic consumption or for export or both. And maybe protect that industry in terms of preferencing or privileging supply from that particular domestic industry versus foreign industries. So a really good example of this in the recent past is the US Inflation Reduction Act, which despite the name doesn't have a lot to do with inflation, but actually promotes, supports, and protects a number of American industries related to green technology, power generation, infrastructure, and so on. And a lot of other countries, including the UK, European Union, Japan, many have complained about this in terms of the effect it has on limiting their ability to compete as export businesses for some of these goods and services in the US that are protected and supported by the Inflation Reduction Act. Now, it does that not by placing huge tariffs on imported goods or by targeting any specific country, but rather by protecting and supporting those domestic industries. And I think there's a real difference in a couple of ways. One is that politically, most of the time in most countries, especially kind of pluralistic democracies, it's a lot harder, politically and legally actually, to enact broad-based industrial policies than it is to adopt targeted tariffs or targeted sanctions or punitive taxes or barriers against a specific country or specific firm even from that country. The second point, though, is that in terms of their actual policy effects, targeted tariffs are not so good as are more broad-based industrial policy strategies, right? So if a country decides we're going to block all imports of, let's say, electric vehicles from China, or steel from China, or whatever it might be, grain from the United States, any particular good or service that you want to block from a particular country, anything like that is simply going to mean that the consumers inside the country that enacts those barriers or tariffs are going to lose, right? They're going to lose either from not being able to access that product or service or good at all, or by having to pay higher prices for it coming from a different country. It also incentivizes some odd or suboptimal behavior by exporters. If they're really desperate to get into that market, they might do something like set up subsidiary firms in third countries or do all kinds of strange and sort of economically sub-rational things in order to get around these barriers. That will only mean that their products and services will be more expensive and harder to access in general, and it will hurt their business. Overall, though, the exporters will usually just find a different market, right? If country A says that they don't want that product or will not allow that product to flow freely into their country, it will just go to country B or country C. And the only people who really lose from that are the people inside country A who either can't get it at all or have to pay the higher price. On the other hand, the kind of broad-based industrial policy that supports, protects, or subsidizes domestic industries can actually have the positive effect that I alluded to in the previous video of in fact slowing down this process of comparative advantage, right? It can actually preserve or promote an industry inside the country that may not be competitive on global terms, right? And it may be useful for social or political reasons to do so, right? Either to protect jobs or to ensure domestic capacity in a certain good or service that is something that the country decides is a sufficiently high priority politically that they don't want to have to rely on imports for that, and they want to maintain a sort of self-sufficiency. Now, again, that still is, in purely economic terms, suboptimal. It means that things will be less efficient and more expensive than would be the case if we had just completely open trade. But it may well be worth it for other political reasons if, in fact, we want to reduce social dislocation or political or security vulnerability. Again, though, that's really a political decision, which is why I think there's this sort of unfortunate contradiction between the fact that these broad-based industrial policies are more effective and better at achieving what it is that their architects really want to do in most cases, versus targeted tariffs that are easier and more expedient politically to enact or adopt, but don't really serve the function either of punishing or undermining one's competitor, whether that be a country, a firm, or a sector, and certainly don't really help, in fact, to protect the jobs or security that their proponents hope that they will. So that is a brief explanation of targeted tariffs versus broad-based industrial policy. Thank you.